be on my way now. You just give me a...
That was a bit of a long intro, but I appreciate you for bearing with me. Harm reduction is a set of ideas that pushes the safe consumption of drugs. The goal is to minimize any risk of partaking in substances and make sure the user has a safe and enjoyable experience. Harm reduction attempts to inform users about the potential dangers of what they're doing and incentivize them to stay safe. One of the key components of harm reduction is research, as it's important to know exactly what you're doing before you do it. Recreational drug use is highly stigmatized as being dangerous and risky, but I want to talk about that word for a second. Risk. Now, this is just my opinion, so you can feel free to disagree, but people are allowed to take risks. And much of the time, they take those risks because the positive outweighs the negative in their mind. You can go skydiving, you can ride a motorcycle, you can have a job with a high mortality rate. You can do so much more that's technically at a risk to your own health. But we generally recognize that adults can assess the dangers and take precautions to be as safe as possible when their health may be at risk. This may seem slightly redundant, but I'm just pointing out that I'm regurgitating sometimes.
And it's just, I think it's also just a sort of a bad road to go down. People always want to emphasize the safety of things, but in my opinion, safety isn't the point. It doesn't ultimately matter to me whether or not something is safe. I think we should have the freedom to do dangerous things if we choose. We're allowed to ride motorcycles, we're allowed to shoot guns, you're allowed to go skydiving and bungee jumping. All those things carry risks, but it's assumed that any adult that does them is aware of those risks.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean,
People are allowed to express their freedoms throughout taking many risks, but drugs are a form of risk that's been widely ostracized and flat out banned by many governments. But for why? Do these wars on drugs really help people stay safe, or do they demonize drug users and push them towards taking even more risks to their health? Instead of being provided information on what they're doing and how they might stay safe, they're forced to turn to the streets, which would subject them to a higher risk of overdose, illness from dirty needles, contaminated drugs, which also leads to more overdoses. There's so many more risks that could be alleviated so simply. I know not everyone will agree with me on opinions like that, but I genuinely believe that the way we treat recreational drugs and drug users in our society can only lead to more and more harm. I really hope to see progress made during my lifetime towards alleviating the epidemics of homelessness and drug addiction. Some general examples of harm reduction from psychonautwiki.org are being knowledgeable about the substance that you're using, measuring dosages, and using test kits to determine the purity of the substance, avoiding the operation of motor vehicles or other potentially dangerous equipment when you're impaired, having a trip sitter to ensure your safety and make sure you have a good time. There's so many examples of harm reduction, and the most important overarching theme is to be aware, to research, assess risks, alleviate them, and have a good time. If you're interested in the specifics of harm reduction, I'll link a couple resources in the description that you can use to further research. One problem that I can actually see with the facets of harm reduction, though, is how easy it really can be to victim blame. When you place all of the burden of research and knowledge onto the drug user themselves, it's an easy way to simplify what most likely could be a highly complicated situation. Harm reduction acknowledges that there is always a risk present, and the goal is to mitigate that as much as possible. Harm reduction can seem to only be about physical safety, but it very much extends to mental health, especially when the use of hallucinogens is involved. The idea of the bad trip very much pervades media in the modern day, and it serves to sort of fearmonger psychedelics for many people. Some people maintain that bad trips happen when people are just ignoring what the trip is trying to show them. some people think that it's a catalyst for growth that can help you see through your problems and get through them. My opinion for a while has sort of been that the idea of a bad trip is inherently harmful in itself because it plants the subconscious seed into people's heads that that's an experience that might happen to them, therefore making it significantly more likely to happen. But especially with it being such a well-known phenomenon, there's not really much you can do about that in this day and age, and I can't really prove to you that bad trips wouldn't happen without that previous subconscious knowledge. There's of course ways to prevent bad trips though, and if you're planning on doing anything, I highly recommend you look those up beforehand. I think one of the most important ones is to have a trip sitter with you. It stems from the word babysitter because it really is one. It's just a person who looks after you while you trip. It's important to have a good trip sitter because they need to be someone that you trust, that won't try to mess with you or do anything that might potentially worsen your experience. This video isn't too long or divided into sections or really as focused as my other recent ones, but I thought that just putting out some info on harm reduction was really important considering the context of what I've been creating on this channel lately. It's incredibly important to stay safe when partaking in substances, and as I said in my last video, drugs can be fun, but your life will never be worth just a bit of fun. Please stay safe and take care of yourselves. This is Bryce, signing off. I hope you have a wonderful night.